I reserved a table for my husband's secret date and surprised them with her family. Madison's hands went numb when she saw the text on Derek's phone. Not literally numb, but that weird disconnected feeling like your brain refuses to process what your eyes are seeing. Tonight's gonna be perfect, babe. Our special spot at Giovanni's, the heart emoji, felt like a knife twist. Derek was belting out some terrible 80s song in the shower, completely oblivious that his secret just exploded in their bedroom. 15 years of shared everything: mortgage payments, grocery runs, parent-teacher conferences. That awful bout of food poisoning in Cancun apparently wasn't enough to keep him from scheduling romantic dinners with someone named Amber. Madison's first instinct was to storm into that bathroom and beat him senseless with his own loofah. But then something clicked in her brain, some weird calm that happens right before you do something completely insane. Derek always complained she was too predictable. Well, buckle up, Buttercup. The minute Derek's stupid Prius disappeared down their street, Madison was speed-dialing Giovanni's like a woman possessed. The perky hostess basically confirmed Madison's worst fears. Mr. Hamilton had been their most romantic regular for months, always requesting table 12 in the corner, always arriving with such a lovely young lady. Madison wanted to reach through the phone and shake this girl until her teeth rattled. Instead, she sweetly requested a table for herself at 7:30, with "the best view of the restaurant, please." Then came the detective work. Amber Wilson wasn't exactly a master of internet privacy. Her Facebook was more open than a 24-hour diner. Dental hygienist, 28, recently divorced, posted more gym selfies than a fitness influencer. But here's where it got interesting. Her parents, Robert and Carol Wilson, were the kind of hardcore Christians who shared "marriage is sacred" memes and posted angry rants about moral decay in America. Perfect. Madison channeled every acting class she'd taken in college and called Carol Wilson with the performance of her lifetime. Poor Amber was going through such a rough patch after her divorce, feeling so isolated and depressed. As her concerned friend, Madison thought a surprise family dinner might lift her spirits. She'd seemed so lonely lately, always talking about missing family time. Carol practically sobbed through the phone about how distant Amber had been, how worried she was about her daughter's emotional state. "That sweet girl has been through so much," Carol kept saying. Yeah, Madison thought, like breaking up someone else's marriage, but she kept that observation to herself. By the time Madison hung up, the entire Wilson clan was mobilized for a surprise family reunion at Giovanni's at 8:15, right smack in the middle of Derek and Amber's romantic pasta fest. Sometimes the universe just hands you the perfect revenge on a silver platter. Derek spent the entire evening primping like he was going to prom. New cologne, that stupid hair gel he only used for important occasions, even flossed his teeth twice. Madison watched this transformation from loving husband to cheating scumbag with the kind of clinical detachment usually reserved for nature documentaries. He kissed her goodbye, actually kissed her, while telling some elaborate lie about client dinners and potential deals. The audacity was breathtaking. Madison slipped into her black dress, the one that made her feel dangerous, and drove to Giovanni's with her heart hammering against her ribs. The restaurant was exactly Derek's style. Dim lighting, exposed brick, the kind of place that screamed affair headquarters. She ordered drink and positioned herself like a sniper in the shadows. At exactly 8 o'clock, Derek waltzed in with a stunning blonde who was definitely not going through post-divorce emotional trauma. Jesus Christ, Derek looked alive. Not just happy, alive in a way Madison hadn't seen since their honeymoon phase 20 years ago. He was laughing, gesturing wildly with his hands, leaning across the table like Amber was the most fascinating person on the planet. This wasn't some midlife crisis hookup. This was Derek genuinely head over heels for another woman. Madison felt something cold and sharp settle in her stomach. Not heartbreak exactly, but something harder, pure, crystallized fury. The Wilson family arrived looking like they were heading to Sunday service. Carol clutching her purse nervously, Robert in his best suit with that stern expression that probably made teenage boys pee themselves, and Tyler looking like he'd rather be getting a root canal. The hostess led them to their table, and Madison could literally see the moment Carol spotted her daughter having a candlelit dinner with a man who was obviously wearing a wedding ring. Carol's face went through this incredible progression of emotions: maternal joy at seeing Amber, confusion about the romantic setup, then dawning horror as she realized her recently divorced daughter was on a date with someone's husband. Robert's expression darkened like storm clouds rolling in, and Tyler just sat there looking like he'd accidentally walked into a horror movie. Meanwhile, Derek and Amber were completely lost in their own little world, sharing dessert and making googly eyes at each other. Derek was doing this thing where he'd touch Amber's hand while he talked, the same gesture he used to use with Madison back when he actually noticed she existed. Amber was eating it up, giggling like a teenager and playing with her hair. Madison took a long sip of wine and settled in to watch the fireworks. The Wilson family was processing what they were seeing, and Carol's face was cycling through denial, anger, and what looked like the beginning stages of a nervous breakdown. Carol shot up from her chair like someone had set it on fire, the scraping sound echoing through the restaurant like a gunshot. Madison watched her march across the dining room with the righteous fury of a woman whose moral worldview had just been shattered. Robert and Tyler scrambled after her, and the entire restaurant started paying attention because nothing draws a crowd like family drama in progress. Carol's voice cut through the ambient chatter when she called Amber's name, not angry yet, just confused and deeply hurt. Amber looked up from gazing into Derek's soul to find her entire family standing beside her romantic dinner table like some kind of intervention squad. The blood drained from her face so fast, Madison thought she might faint. Derek's fork clattered onto his plate with this pathetic little sound, and his smooth operator expression crumbled like wet cardboard. Madison stayed perfectly still in her corner, invisible and loving every second of watching her husband's carefully constructed lie meet reality. Robert's voice boomed across the restaurant like he was delivering a sermon to the back pews, demanding to know who this man was and why his daughter was having what was obviously a romantic dinner with someone wearing a wedding ring. Derek tried to salvage the situation by standing up and offering his hand like this was some normal social introduction, but Robert just stared at it like Derek was offering him a dead fish. Amber looked like she wanted to spontaneously combust, stammering some weak explanation about Derek being just a friend while sitting at a table that screamed romantic rendezvous with wine glasses and flickering candles. Tyler immediately whipped out his phone because his generation's default response to any crisis is to document it for social media. Carol's disappointment was so thick you could cut it with a knife as she asked why Amber hadn't mentioned this friend during their weekly heart-to-heart phone calls. Derek's confident facade evaporated faster than water on hot pavement as he faced the reality of explaining himself to people who clearly weren't buying his garbage. Derek scrambled to come up with some explanation that didn't make him sound like a complete piece of trash. Spinning this ridiculous story about providing Amber with career guidance because she was transitioning between opportunities, Madison had to admire the creativity, but Robert wasn't buying it for a second. Career counseling didn't typically involve intimate corner tables and sharing chocolate mousse, he pointed out with the kind of brutal logic that made Derek's excuse sound even more pathetic. Amber tried to support Derek's story, but she was nervous laughing and couldn't maintain eye contact with her father, which made her about as convincing as a politician during election season. Then Carol dropped the nuclear question. Was Derek married? Madison held her breath, watching her husband calculate in real time whether to tell the truth or dig himself deeper into this hole. Derek actually hesitated, like visibly hesitated, before admitting he was married, but quickly adding that he and his wife were going through a difficult period. Madison's entire body tensed. Even caught red-handed, Derek couldn't resist painting her as the problem in their marriage. The restaurant manager materialized looking like he'd rather be dealing with a grease fire than this family meltdown, politely suggesting everyone lower their voices because other diners were starting to stare and complain. But Robert Wilson was just getting warmed up, his voice rising as he demanded to know if Derek's wife was aware of these cozy dinner arrangements. When Derek admitted she wasn't, Robert's volume increased to what Madison was pretty sure violated noise ordinances. Carol started crying, the ugly kind that ruins makeup and makes your nose red, devastated that her daughter was participating in an affair just months after her own divorce. Tyler kept filming everything while trying to look invisible, probably already composing captions about his sister's restaurant meltdown. Amber finally lost it, snapping at her family that they had no right to interfere in her personal life, because she was an adult who could make her own damn choices. That just made Carol cry harder and turned Robert's face a concerning shade of purple that suggested his blood pressure was reaching dangerous levels. Madison decided it was time for her grand entrance. She stood up with the kind of grace she'd learned in those stupid etiquette classes her mother forced on her, smoothed her dress, and glided over to the train wreck she'd so carefully orchestrated. Every head turned as she approached, and Derek's face went through this amazing color transformation from flushed to pale green, like he was about to lose his expensive dinner all over the Italian tile. Amber looked completely baffled, trying to figure out who this poised woman was and why Derek looked like he'd just seen the Grim Reaper. Madison smiled her most charming smile, the one she used at charity events when dealing with particularly obnoxious donors, and introduced herself to the Wilson family as Derek's wife. She thanked them graciously for helping her understand where her husband had been spending his Friday evenings for the past several months. The silence that followed was so complete, Madison could hear conversations from the kitchen. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, while Amber's eyes ping-ponged between Derek and Madison like she was watching the most devastating tennis match in history. Madison turned to Amber with the kind of polite curiosity she'd use at a book club meeting, asking how long she'd known Derek was married. Amber's response came out in fragments and half-formed sentences, revealing she'd known from day one, but had believed Derek's tragic tale about being trapped in a loveless marriage that was practically over anyway. Madison nodded with understanding, then began casually sharing details about their recent family trip to Disney World, their son's upcoming graduation party, and the romantic weekend getaway Derek had planned for their anniversary next month. Each revelation hit Amber like a physical blow, her face crumpling as she realized how thoroughly Derek had manipulated her with his sob story about marital misery. Derek kept trying to interrupt with damage control, but Madison's calm recitation of their very active, very loving family life made his excuses sound absolutely ridiculous. The Wilson family listened with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for true crime podcasts. Other restaurant patrons had completely abandoned any pretense of eating their own meals and were openly staring at the best dinner theater they'd witnessed in years. Robert Wilson stood up and stepped directly into Derek's personal space, asking with the kind of moral authority that comes from 40 years of marriage how a man could kiss his wife and children goodnight while living such an elaborate deception. Derek's response was pathetic and self-serving, mumbling about never intending for things to progress this far, and claiming he'd been planning to end one of the relationships to sort through his plotted emotions. Madison actually burst out laughing, a sound completely devoid of humor, and asked Derek which relationship he'd planned to sacrifice first. The question hung in the air like a sword, because there was literally no answer that didn't make him look like a complete sociopath. Amber's face went through this awful realization that she'd been just as manipulated as Madison, maybe more so. Carol Wilson reached across the space between them and squeezed Madison's hand in a gesture of female solidarity that almost broke Madison's composure. Tyler continued documenting everything, muttering about this being better content than anything on TikTok. The restaurant manager returned with backup, firmly insisting the entire group relocate their drama to the parking lot before he was forced to involve security. As they all migrated toward the exit, Madison felt this incredible lightness, like she'd been holding her breath for months and could finally exhale. Derek shuffled behind everyone else looking like a kid who'd been caught shoplifting and was being escorted to face his parents. Outside in the cool evening air, Amber unleashed her fury on Derek, her voice shaking with the kind of rage that comes from realizing you've been completely played by someone you trusted. She genuinely believed she was helping him escape an unhappy situation, not actively participating in the destruction of a functioning family. Carol offered to drive Madison home, clearly recognizing a sister in crisis, but Madison politely declined. She had her own transportation and her own plans for how this evening would conclude. Robert shook Madison's hand with the firm grip of a man who respected strength, apologizing for his daughter's involvement in the affair. Madison surprised him by insisting Amber was as much a victim as anyone. Derek's web of lies had created casualties on every side. Derek finally mustered the courage to request a private conversation, but Madison shut that down faster than a bouncer at closing time. Everything that needed discussing could be handled in front of witnesses, she informed him coolly. When Derek asked what would happen next with their marriage, Madison smiled and told him he'd discover that when her attorney contacted him Monday morning. She'd been quietly documenting his suspicious behavior for weeks, and tonight's public spectacle provided her with a restaurant full of additional witnesses to his infidelity. Derek's face collapsed as the full magnitude of consequences began hitting him like falling bricks. Amber walked away without even glancing at Derek, following her devastated family to their car with her head down in shame. Tyler gave Derek one final look of pure disgust before climbing into the back seat. Carol hugged Madison goodbye, whispering that she deserved infinitely better than a man capable of such elaborate deception. Robert nodded grimly at Madison, then informed Derek that he sincerely hoped destroying his family had been worth a few months of stolen excitement. Madison walked to her car feeling like she'd just shed 20 pounds of dead weight she didn't realize she'd been carrying. The parking lot was peaceful after all that chaos, and she took a moment to just stand there and process the complete implosion of her marriage. The weird thing was, she felt relieved instead of devastated. Her marriage had been slowly suffocating for months, while she'd been too busy juggling work and teenagers to notice Derek checking out emotionally. Tonight had just torn away the curtain and revealed what was already rotting underneath. She drove home thinking about her kids, who deserved honesty about what their father had been doing instead of whatever sanitized version Derek would try to spin. As she pulled into their driveway, Madison realized she felt hopeful for the first time in ages. Derek had made his choice months ago when he started his Friday night charade. Tonight, she'd simply ensured he faced the consequences with a full audience watching. The house was quiet except for the porch light welcoming her back to a life that would be challenging but authentic. Madison smiled as she unlocked her front door, knowing she'd never again wonder where her husband really was on Friday nights.